Welcome to Frasier on Film, the Frasier TV show podcast with a twist. Each episode of the podcast visits each episode of Frasier across its 11-series run. But our main focus isn't on the good doctor himself, no. It's going to be one of the guest appearances on the show that week. That could be one of the many A-listers who called into Frasier's KACL radio show, or just someone who made a fleeting appearance at Cafe Nervosa. We'll delve into that actor's backstory, look over their cinematic offerings, and deep dive into one movie specifically. By the end, we'll see if we can make a connection between their character in Frasier and their character in the film we've just talked about. So you'll be hearing about icons and wash-ups, legends and starlets, sherry drinkers and beer guzzlers, blockbusters and B-movies. It's going to be an education in it all. But what if you don't really watch Frasier? That's fine, you'll probably know the actors we're talking about. And if you don't really know the actors we're talking about, then that's fine too. You'll know the movies. So whether you're a fan of Frasier or you're a fan of film, this is the podcast for you. So, pull up your favourite bar stool at McGinty's and tell the wine club you'll be running late, because this is Frasier on Film, and I'm your host, Ben Murray, and you're listening. What if Frasier Crane got home and Daphne had rented the latest Hugh Grant and Sandra Bullock romantic comedy? Would he stick around to watch it? Well, we shall attempt to answer that today as you join me again, this time for Season 1, Episode 6 of both Frasier on Film and of Frasier itself. Today's episode of Frasier is entitled The Crucible, and it's another total blind spot of a guest actor for me today. It's Robert Klein. Yes, I'm sure many of you are applauding and cheering and whooping and hollering. Well, it's blind spot. I say blind spot. My Letterboxd account actually tells me I've seen him in a couple of Sharknado films and a couple of Jerry Seinfeld documentaries. So he's a funny guy, I guess. Well, we'll learn more about that today, won't we? About Mr. Robert Klein and about our film of the week, another new one for me, 2 Weeks Notice. Very exciting stuff, folks. We're covering all the genres over here on Frasier on Film early. Disaster films, rom-coms, we got it all. We got you covered. Returning listeners, my undying thanks to you. New listeners, pull up a chair. We're about to dive into the Klein universe. The Klein universe. But before all that, let's recap what Frasier had in store for us this week.
I finally understand why people take matters into their own hands. It would be so satisfying right now to just slash his tires or throw a brick through his window or something. Just so he'd learn that you don't do this to people and get away with it.
Yes, well, I know you, Frasier, and I know you would never resort to that sort of thing. Would you, Frasier? There's a vein throbbing in your forehead.
Episode title, The Crucible. Air date, 21st of October, 1993. Writers, Cy Duquesne and Denise Moss. Director, James Burrows. Jimmy Burrows is back with us after a week off. So, Mr. Klein is with us right from the beginning. Frasier is there talking to himself at the beginning. He's got no callers. He starts singing to encourage people to call in. Who's in first? Mr. Robert Klein as Gary. It's my first full laugh from a guest caller as well, I must admit. The way that Robert Klein delivers a certain line in his call, which I'll play at the end of this, is quite brilliant. Anyway, on the back end of this call, we find out that Frasier's purchased a new piece of art from the artist Martha Paxton, and he's very excited by it. Even more excited when Martha Paxton calls in behind the scenes of the show. So Frasier tells a little white lie and says that he's actually got a cocktail party planned to celebrate the arrival of the new artwork, and he invites Martha over to his house for the cocktail party. Now, this is the first of many soirees that we will see at Frasier's apartment, and as you will come to learn, Frasier is not very good at throwing parties. Whether they're dinner parties, cocktail parties, birthday parties, they almost always end in disaster. It's kind of his thing. As with the many that follow, most people are invited to the house. So Niles is there, Martin's there, Roz is there, Daphne's there, as well as a whole host of people who are supposedly, I guess, they're Frasier's friends, although we will never see them again because Frasier is infamously friendless for the most part. He hangs out with Niles. Who are all these people in his apartment? That's what I want to know. Frasier has told Niles that Maris has got to babysit Martin all night and make sure that he stays away from the guests, but Maris has collapsed under a sea of coats in the bedroom, which gives Niles an opportunity for some brief alone time with Daphne when he can get it. Martin has also broken ranks and he's going around the party showing crime scene photos from the case we were talking about a few episodes ago, showing it to Frasier's guests. This mortifies Frasier, so he pulls him up on it.
Dad, would you stop showing these crime scene photos? You're embarrassing me.
Oh, these society people eat this up. Besides, she was the one who brought it up.
Oh, she brought it up. Bethany Van Pelt, the head of the Junior League, brought up the subject of a hooker whose body was hideously dismembered and scattered all over an abandoned warehouse.
Yeah. She asked, aren't these Swedish meatballs the messiest things you've ever seen? And I said, no, as a matter of fact. And I still... Dad, please.
And Roz makes her first appearance in Frasier's apartment. She turns up looking very stunning, very elegant. And then Martha Paxton turns up. Quite the eccentric-looking artist, completely bald, long draping earrings, looping necklaces, and a poncho, which she always keeps on because it gives her an excuse not to have to shake hands with people. It's quite a distinctive look, but everything crashes and burns at Frasier's party because when he unveils the painting, she reveals that she has never seen it in her life. He's been had. Frasier's been had by the art gallery. So angrily, he returns to the gallery to be refunded, but they stonewall him. Completely stonewall him. He gets home and says he's going to call the police. But Martin has a bit of a laugh at his expense when it comes to that and lays down a kind of lesson. And he says, you know, sometimes you get screwed over and you just got to live with it.
A beloved household personality and I've been screwed.
For God's sake, Frasier, you're 41 years old. It's time you learned something. The system ain't perfect. Sometimes the bad guy wins. And all those things you thought would be around to help you, the courts and the police department, well, sometimes they're just not there when you need them. So you can either let it eat a hole in your stomach, or you can just file it away under the heading, sometimes life sucks.
Yeah, well, that file's getting pretty thick.
And it's kind of ironic that this is Martin's response, because actually this was forgery. The art gallery faked the art, or if they didn't, they were at least responsible for being the middlemen between the fakery and Frasier purchasing it. So that's actually a pretty significant crime. I think the police would help with that, but I'm probably giving the police far too much credit. In the episode overall, we get a lot of Niles and Daphne time because subsequently Maris lost an earring at the party and Niles and Daphne are running around looking for it, so it gives them a chance to hang out together as characters again, further establishing their bond. But Frasier is fuming, ready to take matters into his own hand, and he wants to throw a brick through the window of the art gallery, and Niles can't believe it. And just when it's about to happen, Niles steps in and he intervenes and he says, Frasier, you can't become a barbarian. And he talks Frasier down. But Frasier inadvertently reminds Niles of the time that he was bullied at school and how he handled it with dignity despite all the insults, all the names that were called. And Niles furiously throws the brick through the window. He says, I'm striking a blow for justice, and the two speed off in his car. That's the episode, and I have to admit, out of all the episodes so far, this is my least favourite. The storytelling doesn't quite feel tight enough for me, and I feel like it misses an opportunity to discuss the value of something being valuable because you like it, because it has value in and of itself rather than who painted it. Instead, they went the route of how you respond when you've been wronged, which is okay, I guess, and there's still lots of laughs and lots of jokes to be had in it. Few bits of trivia. John Rubinstein, who plays the gallery owner that won't refund Frasier and instead is plying him with wine, is actually a skilled composer in real life. He's done scores for lots of films and television shows. Rachel Rosenthal, who plays the artist Martha Paxton, is an artist in real life. She has a small number of screen credits, but she's actually a painter. Just coincidentally, Roz, the actress who plays Roz, tells a waiter to make her a drink and spill a little into the glass in this episode. She says the exact same line in an early episode of the TV show Wings when she appears on it also. But let's get away from all these arty shenanigans and return to the initial call this week. Robert Klein as Gary. He was calling up because he was having an argument with his wife. Let's listen in to our new friend, Robert Klein.
Well, you see, Dr. Crane, my wife's hell-bent on going to Italy this year.
Ah, Italia. The rolling hills of Toscana. The art of Firenze. The passion that is Venezia.
Yeah, well, anyway, I like taking vacation as much as the next guy. But I say if we dip into our savings, the first thing we should buy is a new sump pump for the basement. At least with that...
Oh, listen, Gary, let me just stop you right there. I'm afraid I'm going to have to side with your wife on this one.
But the trip to Italy costs $1,800, and that doesn't include the splendors of the Vatican package.
Gary, there is more to life than sump pumps.
Frasier goes on to wax a little bit lyrical about the Martha Paxton he's just bought and the importance of spending money on things which can enrich your life.
I still think I should get the sump pump.
Well, then, yes, Gary, you should get the sump pump.
Robert Klein, born February the 8th, 1942 in the Bronx, New York. Grandson to Hungarian Jewish immigrants, Klein said his upbringing was in a prototypical 1950s Bronx Jewish environment. His father was a textile salesman with a sense of humour, and his mother had a penchant for belting out show tunes while playing the piano. They were both avid theatre goers, so it's perhaps no wonder that this family history would be instrumental in influencing Klein's path in life. While at college, Klein began singing with a doo-wop group and even appeared on television's The Original Amateur Hour. No, I've never heard of it either. Music would remain a constant in his life. Following college, he planned to study medicine, but during his studies at Alfred University, he faced what he called subtle anti-Semitism, something which made him decide to switch his focus and move towards acting as a means to work through the experience.
It was a good experience for me because it was an incredibly rural place, and coming from the Bronx originally to go there was a real, a revelation. And the first thing I noticed is that they made fun of the way I spoke.
Sure, you must have talked like...
Exactly. Hey, you talk. He talks like talk, New York. Talk. And of course there was nothing unusual about their talk. Hey, my father gave me $1 to get married.
Is that what...
I'm getting married next Saturday, and my father is so upset about, just so he come from counselor. I go, hey, Bab. 4 years they called me. I didn't know who they were talking to. Hey, Bab.
Bab?
Bab, and they made fun of me. And I was so uptight that I actually adapted my speech to theirs in order to belong, not to get eyes. That was enough,
Yeah.
And I used to, can I have a pound of butter, please? I used to talk just like that. I actually put on a kind of rural accent for them.
He went to Yale to study theatre, but he was too anxious to see out his studies. Wanting to dive right into it, he returned to his home of New York. He had little luck getting any roles on stage. In these formative years, he'd been a huge fan of stand-up comedians, specifically Lenny Bruce. So he decided to try his hand at comedy clubs in Greenwich Village, eventually leading to him joining the infamous Second City Improv Comedy Troupe. Now, apparently Second City is the oldest improvisational theatre troupe to be continuously based in Chicago. I'm not sure if that's something to be proud of or not. I'm not sure how much of an accolade it is, with the caveat in Chicago. But there we go. Klein's audition to join them consisted of a sketch about two men in a nightclub. The improv skills Klein learned during his time would be crucial to his later career in stand-up comedy. Upon return to New York, Klein made his Broadway debut starring in Mike Nichols' The Apple Tree. His comedy club appearances remained consistent, and he caught the eye of Rodney Dangerfield, who became a father figure and mentor to Klein. He helped Klein make his first appearance on Johnny Carson's The Tonight Show in 1968. Now get this, that appearance was the first of more than 100 Klein would make on the show. Klein was a huge hit, and it launched his movie and television career. The movie roles were small, including The Owl and the Pussycat and The Landlord, but he was renowned as a comedian by this point. Alongside Richard Pryor and George Carlin, he became instrumental in changing the nature of stand-up. His style was socially aware and conversational. It wasn't about punchline after punchline. He was considered part of the counterculture, rebellious and anti-authoritative. He would go on to release a string of comedy albums touching on subjects from Vietnam to the Watergate scandal. College kids would throng to see him. In 1975, he would go on to become one of the first hosts of Saturday Night Live. He would also be the first comedian to be given a HBO special. He even hosted his own TV show, Robert Klein Time, from 1986 to 1988. But as mentioned before, Klein was also enraptured by music. That perhaps explains the pathway to his marriage to opera singer Brenda Boozer in 1973, a marriage that would end in 1989. But his musical prowess was never more pronounced than when he received a nomination for a Tony Award, our old friend the Tony, following his starring role in Neil Simon's They're Playing Our Song. As part of this research, it's become apparent that film work was low down the pecking order in the list of strings to Klein's bow. But he's made countless appearances over the years, from supporting roles in Adam Sandler vehicles like Reign Over Me through to today's feature film, Mike Nichols' 2 Weeks' Notice. But he's clearly been more comfortable on television, with recurring roles on drama series like Sisters and sitcoms including Family Ties, The King of Queens, Will and Grace, and of course, Frasier. Among the comedians who have cited Klein as a major influence on their work are Jay Leno, Bill Maher, Richard Lewis, Billy Crystal, and Jerry Seinfeld. Seinfeld, who actually said of Klein, he was the Beatles of comedy to me.
An instant oatmeal took me 2-3 minutes. It says, tear here, I'm tearing here, you son of a bitch. Try opening a CD in less than 2-3 hours. Then you scratch the thing, you break the hinge. Someone gave me earphones for my birthday. It took me 4 weeks to open the package. I got it open initially in 3-4 seconds. Then the rigid plastic cut a vein in an artery here. So I was spurting blood to the ceiling. It looked like a Monty Python sketch.
In later years, he has admitted to smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day for most of his life. It led to a diagnosis of COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, something he lives with to this day. He has spoken openly about the diagnosis in the hopes it will help others from taking up smoking. So what have we learned? Well, I was right. He's a funny man, exclusively, it seems, and his shtick is stand-up, not so much acting, though he's clearly got the chops for it from his various appearances on stage and on television and in film, but I'm really not familiar with him. Not even his stand-up, but as part of this process, I did watch and listen to a few of his bits, and I have to say, it doesn't really tickle my funny bone. It feels a little dated, but it does feel like it was of a time and a place. We're talking about a man now in his 80s. You know, if he can raise a smile for me now, he's done his job. I'm just some indignant little millennial. He's made a career out of comedy, so who am I to say? So what am I expecting from his appearance in 2 Weeks' Notice? Well, I guess I'm expecting a sort of smart talking bit part character, maybe coming up with the witty one-liners on the side while Hugh Grant and Sandra Bullock take care of the main plot. It'll be interesting to see how he handles someone else's material, obviously, because this is not his writing. He's going to be projecting someone else's words out of his mouth. So we're about to find out how well he does it. Let's explore what he's got for us. Let me see if he can make me laugh once or smile once in this film. Let's switch focus to 2002's 2 Weeks' Notice.
Meet Lucy Kelson.
Hey, that's my coffee, you jerk!
Oh, sir, I'm so sorry. See, I thought you were needy.
She has a law degree from Harvard.
You're my brilliant chief counsel who's always honest with me.
Well, then, honestly, I think you are the most selfish human being on the planet.
Well, that's just silly. Have you met everyone on the planet?
And an eccentric billionaire boss.
Congratulations on the baby.
What baby?
Maybe you should check with me before you talk.
What baby?
Who's driving her to the edge.
Hello?
I just felt like a bit of a chitter-chat.
You are pathetic.
This holiday season, the only way to get noticed
I'm not here to pick out a wife or to pick out your clothes. Oh, sorry.
is to give notice.
Consider this my 2 weeks' notice.
My, you certainly get what you pay for. With that trailer, let me tell you, 2 Weeks' Notice, released 2002, directed by Mark Lawrence and starring Sandra Bullock, Hugh Grant, Alicia Witt, Dana Ivey, and last but not least, Robert Klein. Oh, there is least. And I should warn you, it's Donald Trump. A rare, wild Trump appears. Brace yourself, but let me tell you, if you're not scared at the sight of Donald Trump by now and immune to it, I don't know what to tell you. Dearie me. This film was all kinds of bad, wasn't it? Look, these are not my kinds of films to begin with. These are romantic comedies. I understand there's a time and a place for everything in every genre, and my personal preferences shouldn't impact whether or not someone can enjoy this, and it isn't meant to put anyone off enjoying this if this is your kind of thing. I can see that it follows a very tried and trusted romantic comedy formula, and it ticks all the boxes very well. What do I mean by that? I mean, we have Sandra Bullock and Hugh Grant as two polar opposites. They are forced to meet/work with each other. I mean, you can take out Sandra Bullock and Hugh Grant and just replace, carbon copy the romantic comedy formula here, right? Inevitably, somewhere along the line, despite all of their clashes, that inevitably means they must fall in love with one another and want to bed each other. And then something comes along which will look like it's bound to divide them forever. But, isn't it lovely? It all works out in the end. That's 2 weeks' notice, ladies and gentlemen. That is the film, and you get what you paid for. I mean it. You heard that trailer? That is the film. Very much so. Hugh Grant has never been more insufferably Hugh Grant. I mean, I say that, but I like him. I like him, particularly lately, and I do like him in things like Notting Hill. That's a good example of a romantic comedy, by the way. I was thinking the other night, what are the romantic comedies I like? You've Got Mail, Notting Hill, they're the two. Anyway, he is Hugh Grant dialed up to 11, by which I mean it's clearly been written by an American, and the American writer, Mark Lawrence, has said to Hugh Grant, can you make this a little bit more British? And Hugh Grant's clearly said, well, I am British. This is how we talk. No, dial it up. Dial it up more. Dial it up more, sir. We want you to be more of a Cockney, but a posh Cockney. That was meant to be an American accent. See, this is why people who don't come from a certain country should not do impressions and shouldn't tell people how to do it, because this is clearly what happened here, and Hugh Grant sounds ridiculous. Such phony Britishness, but maybe that will go over the heads of many American audiences. Sandra Bullock is great. She's great in this. She outacts and outperforms Hugh Grant quite easily. She's the lead also, and fittingly, and I'm glad she is. It would have been very easy for this to have been a Hugh Grant vehicle, but it is her film. Crucially, she's also funnier than him, and I wasn't sure how that was going to play out, because normally in these sorts of films, Hugh Grant is the comedic bumbling fool, and the women are just there to stand opposite him and be frustrated by him and then fall in love with him. Not so here. She actually challenges him, and she is funnier than him. The dialogue is really on the nose, and when I say that, I mean the jokes are really on the nose. The pratfalls are really on the nose. We have scenes where tennis balls hit people in faces, and there's comedy rinsed out of that. People collide into plants in their offices, and there's comedy in that. There's big ties, there's odd socks, there's all sorts of silly nonsense like that. There's also some really on the nose music choices throughout this film, by which I mean every time a plot beat develops, we pick a song that reminds you exactly what's going on. Case in point. And here is also our concept for the film. Sandra Bullock wants to protect a community centre from demolition. Hugh Grant is someone who wants to build big high-rises. He's a billionaire. He wants to block everything out. That's the central theme of the film. And within 10-15 minutes after Sandra Bullock's been arrested, she sits on a pier and she sort of looks around at the working class people. And while she's looking around at their places of sanctuary, like little cafes and the community centre and theatres and libraries and things like that, it's juxtaposed with this skyscraper backdrop and what's inevitably coming. What song do you play? Counting Crows. Put up a parking lot. Big Yellow Taxi. You Paid Paradise. Whatever you want to call that song. That one. And that was the first of many songs that accompanied the action, and that one was kind of like, okay, yeah, fitting. It came out in 2002, same time as this film, so that makes sense. But then halfway through the film, when it's already testing my patience, you have a scene with Hugh Grant and Sandra Bullock in the car, and for various reasons Sandra Bullock really needs to shit. I'm sorry folks, this is just the plot point. And they're stuck in a traffic jam and they're going nowhere, and Hugh Grant sees an RV down the highway. So he grabs her and he picks her up and he rushes her over to the RV. What song plays? Taking Care of Business by T-Rex. There are other examples of this. Watch the film, see how many you can spot yourself. Quite ridiculous. If that wasn't bad enough, we also get, as I mentioned, an appearance from Trump. We get a Trump name drop within 10 minutes of the film. And then just when you think it's safe to go back in the water, we get an appearance from the man himself. Here he is.
Wade.
Trump.
I hear Kelson finally dumped you.
Not exactly, no. We just came to a mutual understanding that she couldn't bear me for another second, that's all.
So who's the new chief counsel? If she's any good, I'm going to steal her away.
I doubt it. She seems quite loyal to me.
Let me be the judge of that.
All right. Not intimidated? I'll even lead you to her.
Now, despite all of this, and this is in by no way me saying I enjoyed the film, I have to give it credit for just so audaciously just doing exactly the bare minimum to pass for a romantic comedy and to pass for entertainment. There will be many, many people who love this film. Good, I'm glad. There will be many people who think this one in particular is a real favourite of mine. Fine, if that's the case, that is great. And I can see why. The reason why it follows a very simple formula. It follows all the plot beats as mentioned. It doesn't do it very effectively is my issue with it. So I can give it plaudits for following the guidance, following the map, following the plot points. But almost every joke fails. Almost every scenario fails. Hugh Grant is probably the most unlikable I've seen him in many, many films. I reserve the distinction of the worst Hugh Grant performance being 4 Weddings and a Funeral, though, and that will lose me fans. I know, because people love that film. I don't like it. I do like Hugh Grant, though. Like I say, I like Notting Hill. But this, no. This one's saccharine. It's quite silly. It's all on the nose. But somehow I have to give it credit because kind of I went with it and I kept going, yeah, well, this was me watching the film. Yep, of course. Yep, of course that would happen, right? Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. Yep. Naturally, that's going to be the next step. There's a scene where he professes his love for Sandra Bullock and there are 2 women sitting beside her who've barely heard his ridiculous speech as to why he loves her, which is pathetic. And they start sniffling and crying about it. And it's like, oh, dearie me. Quite dated. Quite dated. I feel like if you watched this back in 2002, at the turn of the 21st century, you'd probably be a lot kinder on it than if you watched it now. It wouldn't get made now. It simply wouldn't get made. One of the key reasons it wouldn't get made is because of the central theme about this billionaire who grows a heart and Sandra Bullock falls in love with him because of what exactly? That's the thing. There is nothing to fall in love with him about. He's not arrogant. He's just highly annoying all the way through. There's nothing really to this man. He's a billionaire who just quick talks and does all this British foppish talk. There is clearly the introduction of another woman in the narrative, 2/3 through, Alicia Witt, whose introduction is merely for you as an audience to side with Sandra Bullock and then think, okay, I never gave a shit about Sandra Bullock and Hugh Grant before, but now that you've introduced this second woman, who is a rival for Sandra Bullock, I'm on Sandra Bullock's side, because they make Alicia Witt the villain of the piece. I'm on Sandra Bullock's side, ergo, I want Sandra Bullock and Hugh Grant to get together. But you don't actually. You've just been manipulated to do that by the producers, by the directors, by everything. But go ahead, that's what these films are, and if you like them, more power to you. What is interesting to me is that the opening credits of the film set it up to be great. In the opening credits of the film, you have baby shots of Hugh Grant and Sandra Bullock. It's so clearly them. And then as they get older, they've taken their faces and superimposed them onto images of other people in different scenarios. And it's quite clever, and I was on board. But then immediately it cuts to a shot of Sandra Bullock clinging on the wrecking ball of a bulldozer to stop it slamming into a theatre. And I'm like, okay, we're this kind of film, are we? We're doing this. We're doing this gag of, look at this person clinging onto what is clearly a massive paper mache wrecking ball. No, let's not do that. Let's give it credit where credit's due. This is probably the most fascinating thing about the film, and you have to look at it into it after the film has ended to find this out. It's the first Hollywood production post 9/11 shot in New York. So there are loads of New York shots all through the film, which at the time I just thought, God, there's a lot of green screen of New York. But no, they were just shooting all over New York all the time. Lots of helicopter shots of New York, lots of shots quite clearly of the area where the 2 towers were standing once upon a time. So it's done with a certain amount of love and care for the city, and apparently a lot of money went into the city from the making of this film. So that's something. And, say what you will about Trump, I know what that man is like as a businessman, and at that time he would have seen that as a good personal investment for that to be happening, which is why I can imagine he was involved in this film. Sadly, that doesn't make the whole film experience overall, and if you like it, I can understand why. This is not my bag, and I would never want to subject myself to anything like it ever again, although I fear on this podcast, chances of me enduring something like this again are highly likely.
Because I've managed to turn myself into this, there's not even a name for it.
Well, it's not like I'm enjoying it either, you know. Before you came into my life, I was capable of making all kinds of decisions. Now I can't. I'm addicted. I have to know what you think. What do you think?
But let's go to Robert Klein, the man of the moment, the reason we're doing 2 weeks' notice. Well, listeners, if you've seen this film, you will know that Robert Klein is in this barely at all. Arguably, his character Gary in Frasier has more lines in 30 seconds than Robert Klein has in this entire movie. That's not entirely true. So this is what we get with Robert Klein. We have 4 scenes. Robert Klein is Sandra Bullock's father. He gets 4 scenes in the film. The first is bailing his daughter out of jail. Lasts about 20 seconds. The second scene is over lunch. Sandra Bullock is talking about taking a job with Hugh Grant's character, and Robert Klein is there with his wife, sort of talking to her about the situation. The third scene is when he and his wife meet Hugh Grant's character through a chain link fence, and we see that he actually likes Hugh Grant's character and agrees with him more than Sandra Bullock's mum does anyway. And finally, we get the significant scene with him, which is in the kitchen towards the end of the film, when everything seems to be going wrong. He reminds Sandra Bullock that people can change, people can make a difference and surprise you, and he uses himself as an example. He's eating soy cake, and he says, why would I be doing that? Because he changes because of love. I have to admit, I'm not so sure that I care much about the underlying, go with the man. The man is going to tell you what to do. Put your ethics and morals to the side a little bit, which is kind of there, even though, because it's not fair to Robert Klein to say he doesn't have them. He does. He champions women's rights. He champions civil rights. He actually says it in this table scene, but it's kind of like, give this billionaire a chance. It's going to be okay. You have to compromise a little, and he can change. It's probably as progressive as we were going to get in 2002, to be honest. Klein himself, we don't get much in the way of a performance by him. He's done up as an old man. He's in an oversized cardigan. His wife, played by Dana Ivey, is the one who helps to find him because she is very stern. He does that too, just in a softened way. He doesn't really smart talk in this film. There's no significant funny lines. And if I'm honest, it's a bit hard to marry this role that Robert Klein's picked with anything we've learned about the man today. I can't imagine he was paid a lot, so I'm not really sure what attracted him to this film other than a chance to jump into a movie, I suppose. That said, he's solid and good in the limited amount of time that he is on screen. But for a while there, it really was looking like his character of Gary in Frasier was going to be more significant. But the final scene in the kitchen means we get our final redemptive moment at the community centre. And then Hugh Grant has changed a bit, so has Sandra Bullock, thanks to her father's kind words. So he's limited, but he makes that final narrative push there. But it is very reliant on his relationship with his wife. I can't find anything from Klein in terms of what he thought about 2 weeks' notice, any anecdotes, any appreciation for the experience. So it's hard to know whether he's proud of it or not, but I'm sure he was happy, more than happy, with the salary that he would have been paid for this, if nothing else. I must say it does make me appreciate his stand-up a little bit more because he's obviously far bigger and better than what he was given to work with in this film. A few bits of trivia here. Hugh Grant has said that Sandra Bullock was his favourite person to work with throughout his career, and that's very significant because I've seen Hugh Grant on multiple interviews talking about how much the leading ladies always hated him. And when I was watching this, I was in the back of my mind thinking, is Sandra Bullock one of the ones? Clearly not. They get on. This is the first of 4 Hugh Grant collaborations with director Mark Lawrence, with the others being music and lyrics, Did You Hear About the Morgans, and The Rewrite. I will not be watching any of them, thank you very much. Last bit of trivia, and a ridiculous one at that. The house that George's brother lives in, George is Hugh Grant, and his brother is an actor that Brits may be familiar with. He was in The Thin Blue Line. His brother is living in one of Donald Trump's homes in the film. Trump actually lent his Westchester home to the production and shot a cameo for the film. So that makes this a little bit dirty and tainted, doesn't it? Well, what can you do about it? I'll tell you one thing we can do to cleanse our palate. Why don't we go to the phones and get someone else's opinion on this? Because I'm very skewed. Let's go to line 4. Line 4, you're on the air.
This film is like a bingo card of everything that was wrong with early 2000s rom-coms. It had an insipid female lead who's supposed to be the smart girl, so she's not that pretty, despite being played by one of the most beautiful women in the world. It romanticised the most toxic male behaviour and toxic relationships, and it had literal toilet humour. It had it all. I wish I could unsee it. It was fucking dreadful, and it's a shame because the cast is fantastic, and quite frankly, they all deserved better, as did we. Probably the only redeeming character in the film is Sandra Bullock's dad, played by Robert Klein, who plays the lovable, supportive dad, albeit a very stereotypical one, in his knitted cardigan and constantly being berated by his wife for eating the wrong things. He was still very lovable, and I'm sure the kind of dad everyone would love to have, even if he did tell his daughter to change everything about herself to be with the man she loves at the end. But given the tone of the film, what else is to be expected?
Great minds, Tia. Great minds. Looks like I'm not alone in how I felt.
I just really feel the need to make a connection.
Well, Niles, I think you've made a connection. It just seems a little bit extreme, though, you know?
So let's close today with our Crane Connection, the part of the show where we try to link everything back to the episode of Frasier we watched, specifically where we try to link Robert Klein's Gary, the sump pump enthusiast, try and say that very quickly several times, to Robert Klein's Larry Kelson, the easygoing yet straight-talking father of Sandra Bullock. I think the key connection comes down to marriage and his approach to it. As Gary, he's so stubborn with his wife and unromantic that he'd rather phone a call-in radio show to have a stranger tell him whether he should go to Europe with his wife or whether he should buy a sump pump. On the other hand, as Larry Kelson, the man loves his wife so much, he's the yin to her yang in a good way. He wants progress, he's willing to change and be flexible in the path of what's right, but also because of love, in the name of love. So Gary and Larry couldn't be more different then. But I think what connects them is their polar opposite approach to life. One's rigid and stubborn, and the other one is married to someone rigid and stubborn, but in the best way possible. In many ways, Gary's caterpillar cocooned into Larry's butterfly, spread his wings and embraced the future. A future with a Donald Trump jump scare. So sadly, we must say goodbye again. Goodbye to the art world and all the fussy phonies and fraudulent fakeries Frasier had to deal with. Goodbye to Gary, destined to live with a flooded basement. Goodbye to 2 weeks' notice and its irritating if perfectly formulaic approach to the rom-com. And goodbye to Robert Klein, whose dalliances with the entertainment world are probably best left on stage, live, with a microphone in hand or a song in his heart, and not on the pages of a Mark Lawrence script. As always, thank you to my beautiful, lovely listeners. Cheers for liking, cheers for subscribing, and cheers for sharing if you're doing that. You can stay up to date with all the upcoming episodes by subscribing to the podcast. Just search for Frasier on Film on all the usual podcast platforms to make sure you don't miss a single episode. You can also connect with me online on all the usual places. I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Threads. Search for @Frasier on Film if you're interested in following what I've got to say. And you can also get in touch via email using frasieronfilm@gmail.com. And if you've liked what you've heard, drop me a review on Apple Podcasts. 5 stars would be the preference, but if it must be a 1-star review, much like today's film, at least let me know where I got it wrong. Next week's episode, we shall see Frasier entertain one of his first dalliances with the opposite sex, but he'll also be crossing the line when it comes to his ethics and his morals. It's Call Me Irresponsible time. Our guest actor for that episode will be Bruno Kirby, and the film which we'll be spotlighting is 1990's The Freshman. Frasier has left the building.